Order, and welcome everyone. Taiwo Owatemi to move the motion. Taiwo.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And thank you to every single member and my honourable members who have chosen to participate in this important debate and represent their constituents' concern. The impact of new development being imposed on our treasure greenbelt is a burning issue for many of my constituents in Coventry, North West. So I welcome this opportunity to highlight their frustrations. From Eastern Green to Aldesley, Kersley and Holbrooks, communities in my constituencies have seen vital green spaces lost to new housing developments in recent years, and with more of our local green belt threatened with the same fate if we do not change course. Campaigners in Coventry want to see a bold change of direction concerning planning and development policy. So I hope that securing this debate today will force the government to listen and to take note. I want to start by examining the process by which houses are built and how it favours big developers who are not accountable to local communities and often ignore local housing needs. We all know that Britain has long faced a housing crisis. Waiting lists for social housing continues to grow to record lengths, whilst home ownership in the UK has fallen to 65%, with many struggling to get onto the housing ladder. It is a plight that stretches across all our constituencies, and it is left unaddressed by this Conservative government for over a decade. The government has also failed to introduce any meaningful reforms to planning and development since I became an MP for Coventry North West in 2019. Serious changes in these areas is long overdue. The lack of action means that we are left living in a planning and development free-for-all, and the impact on our local communities is clear for all to see. As things currently stand, it is private developers that hold the balance of power. They decide which type of houses are built, where they are built, and the prices that they are sold for. They are not accountable to anyone but themselves, not to communities, not to local people, not to local government, and not even to national government. For years now, my constituents have told me that the current planning rules are not fit for purpose. They currently serve developers' greed and do nothing to allow local voices and those most impacted by new development to be heard. We need to be able to hold developers to account. Developers will claim that they are helping to fix Britain's housing crisis by building new development. But the truth is, until they start listening to the need of local people, they will only make the problem worse. Indeed, the new Prime Minister's suggestion that we should simply hand more power to property developers risks permanently changing our communities. Residents, elected representatives, and their voices are going to be virtually wiped out of the planning process if the Prime Minister ignores their objections and presses ahead with these changes. But is it any wonder that this Conservative Prime Minister wants to hand even greater power to wealthy developers when property developers were responsible for 20% of all donations to the Conservative Party between 2010 and 2020? More than 16 million. While Conservatives locally in Coventry conveniently pretend to care about saving our green belt from developments, the very same political party is lining its pockets with donations from the very housing developers that they claim to be standing up to. This is unacceptable. We need our government to stand up for local people, not those seeking to maximise their profits at the expenses of our precious green belt. Our planning system is completely broken, and the answer cannot be to hand more power to a few greedy developers. Instead, a complete overhaul is required, where local communities and local government are in the driving seat. That way, they can set the direction of travel concerning new development in their neighbourhoods, delivering affordable homes for families exactly where we need them. A survey of my constituents that I carried out recently unsurprisingly revealed that a clear majority said they want to see more affordable homes built in Coventry, but that these homes should be built on the existing brownfield sites across the city, instead of on our treasured green spaces. The survey also showed that the residents were overwhelmingly against any proposed changes to planning rules that will make building on Greenbelt easier. A majority of residents were also worried the rule changes would mean local people have even less say when a new development is proposed where they live. And so I call on the government to take action to make sure that developers are accountable to local people, communities, elected representatives and elected representatives.
Can I commend everybody in bringing this forward, and I really apologise to yourself, Mr. Anybody, for not being here for later on, because I have another thing to go to. But does the honourable member not agree that as much with much in life, as we all know, there's a delicate balance to be found, whether it be urban or rural development, and the current planning does not find the balance that is as common sense, and community planning takes a backseat to the interpretation of the law. And what we need to ensure future planning is flexible enough to protect both urban and rural development, and to ensure that the communities have a full say in what happens. In many cases, and I know the rules are different in Northern Ireland than they are here, in many cases back home I find that local people do not have the input that they should have.
The member makes an important point, and he's absolutely right. The local people need to be able to have a local say on developments in their area. Developers should never be in a position where they are dictating to people in Coventry North West, who have often lived in the area for generations, what is in their best interest. Next, I want to take a moment to look at the statistics, which are often used to estimate how many homes should be built and where. With the recent announced 38 new investment zones, Whitehall is taking more and more control over the planning processes in our towns and cities. This approach is often predicted on census projection. However, in Coventry, these predictions have turned out to be way off. Our population has not grown anywhere near as quickly as was anticipated. Whilst the Office for National Statistics estimated Coventry's population would be over 379,000, recently released census results show that our city's population actually stood at just 345,000, more than 30,000 less than predicted. This means that green belt land may be torn up unnecessarily for houses that are not actually needed. It is now clear that government projections were plain wrong and that top-down imposed housing building targets are widely inaccurate. The outcome in Coventry has meant that some of the most beautiful green spaces in my constituency have been needlessly taken away from Greenbelt and allocated for house building instead. The figures do not stack up. I would like to see a halt on building on any Greenbelt land for the short term around Coventry. While accurate figures are calculated, I have repeatedly joined campaigners across Coventry in calling for these figures to be reviewed, but our pleas have fallen on deaf ears. The government has refused to take any action to remedy this situation, and so the decimation of our Greenbelt is poised to continue. Plans are still ongoing to build new developments that few people want, and overwhelmingly 92% of residents who took part in my survey felt that those elected to represent us on the City Council must have a proper say on new development proposed in our city. But local government currently has very little power on this matter.
For the excellent speech that's been put across so far. In my constituency in Weaver Vale, there are currently over 2,000 units being built as we speak on Greenbelt land. This Greenbelt land, former Greenbelt land, was purchased by the government agency called Homes England. Yet the National Planning Framework talks about building Greenbelt in exceptional circumstances. There's huge contradictions, and the direction of travel seems to be further liberalisation. I would agree with the point made by the honourable member that actually it needs to be strengthened protections of Greenbelt.
Taiwo Owatemi.
Thank the honourable member for making an important point, and he's right that we have to continue to strengthen the protection of our Greenbelt. And overwhelmingly 92% of residents who took part in my survey thought that those elected to represent us in the City Council must have a proper say on new development proposals in our community. But local government currently has very little power on this matter. Instead, it is Whitehall that is able to impose house building targets based on their faulty figures. I want to see a real shift in power, away from Whitehall and towards local government. This would mean the local elected representatives accountable to their residents who live and breathe their community can have the final say on new development. That way, we can abandon the inaccurate housing building targets imposed by Whitehall and get on with meeting local housing needs. In contrast to this, Conservative government, who have consistently sided with wealthy developers over local people, the Labour Party has set out a very different vision for planning and development policy. Labour will hand power to local communities to build the affordable housing that they need and give councils the ability to build much-needed social housing. The houses that we need and where local people want them to be built. When new developments are built, Labour would give priority to first-time buyers and prevent new homes from being brought up by foreign investors before local people get a look in. This will put the dream of owning your own home in the reach of many people who currently cannot get onto the housing ladder and reverse the decline in home ownership that we have seen under this government. Now, other Conservatives are in the pockets of their property developer donors. A Labour government will be on the side of local communities and delivering the housing that Britain actually needs. For far too often, houses being built are in opposition to what people need and want. Across the communities in Holbrooks, Aldesley, Kersley and Eastern Green in my constituency, many have real and heartfelt anxieties about the impact of large-scale new development and its devastating impact upon greenbelt land. This is because the wrong type of housing is being built, and those houses are being built in the wrong part of the city. And eventually, they are going to be sold at an affordable price. From start to finish, it is a mess caused by a broken system. These communities are already changing because of overdevelopment, and this is a great deal of frustration that whole communities can have large-scale development imposed on them without receiving the investment that is needed. Too frequently, when these homes are built in the wrong part of our city, the additional local services and new infrastructure required to support them are not put in place. Greedy developers must not be allowed to profit from building hundreds of expensive new houses against the will of local people and then walk away doing nothing to provide much-needed services and infrastructure. New development in Coventry North West are often built far from the nearest GP surgery, schools or shops, and without proper broadband connection. These developments often have no public transport or adequate roads either. Everyone is fed up of massive developments being allowed to go ahead without proper thought and consideration to the infrastructure needed and the availability of public services. It is just not good enough. It is morally bankrupt to build homes without also ensuring access to vital services. And it makes no practical sense either, as extra pressure is piled onto already overstretched services. Developers will always want to turn a profit, but it must be made to play their part in delivering the services and infrastructure required to support the new homes they build. In my constituency, too many homes are being built on greenbelt land and are simply too expensive for local people to afford. I have met repeatedly with big developers insisting that they build affordable, family-sized homes for first-time buyers in the right part of our city. But these calls have repeatedly been dismissed. We must build homes that are affordable for families living in Coventry. Otherwise, what is the point of them at all? Overpriced homes and out-of-reach mortgages are not what my constituents need. In Coventry, there are brownfield sites and similar land suited for redevelopment, and that must be used first before developers start destroying our precious greenbelt. Rather than build on the greenbelt at the behest of greedy developers, I want to see house building on these brownfield sites, on disused land and in empty buildings, because this is what local people have asked for. Lastly, I want to highlight some of the specific local concerns that are affecting my constituency. Too often, developers earmark popular open spaces in our towns and cities for new homes, depriving communities of much-needed and popular open spaces. This is certainly a problem in my constituency. Take Camden Wedge, a beautiful spot enjoyed by people from across our city. Developers have been eyeing up Camden Wedge for some time now, and as homes are proposed to be built on nearby Browns Lane, many residents are understandably anxious that the wedge itself will be next. The local council has made clear for decades that they do not want to build homes on Camden Wedge. But many fear that that with inaccurate housing building targets being imposed on Coventry from Whitehall, their hands may soon be forced, and this is totally unacceptable. Camden Wedge must not be put for sale, and as a local MP, I will oppose any future plans for new developments on this vital green space. Now, whilst local Conservatives in Coventry have been cynically campaigning to save Camden Wedge for their own political gain, it is their party that has been in power for the last 12 years and has failed to deliver long overdue reforms to our planning law. They are overseeing the very same planning and development free-for-all that threatens the future of the wedge. And indeed, when the Conservatives last led Coventry City Council, they proposed thousands of new homes on Greenbelt land in Kersley, also in my constituency. Happy to give way.
Caroline Ansell.
For giving way, and clearly I am here in support of many of the arguments that she's made today. I share her concern about greenfield development, but one of the issues for me in my constituency is the absence of a local plan. That sits with local government. I wonder if that is the case in her patch also, because I understand in her area, as in mine, there's a very long waiting list for social housing.
Owatemi.
I thank the Honourable Member for making an important point. And yes, in my constituency, there is a long waiting list for housing, and local government needs to have more control on that. People in my constituency will not be so easily fooled, and their hypocrisy will not go unnoticed. I have covered a number of issues today, including our house building favours large developers, how the statistics used are often inaccurate and lead to undesirable outcomes, and how the houses being built are often not what is needed or wanted by local people. I am sure that many members here today will have similar issues in their constituency. Like me, they have heard from concerned constituents who are opposed to the current development free-for-all. It is seriously concerning that the new Prime Minister appears determined to make the situation even messier. We have seen reports in the media just this week of government ministers scheming to hand over yet more power to developers. At the same time, they want to scrap rules that ensure new homes are affordable and also remove wildlife protections. This government wants to create a developer Wild West, and it is completely out of order. I believe that the only way to deliver for our constituents is to listen to their concerns, and it is overwhelmingly clear to me that they want good quality, family-sized homes that are for sale at an affordable price. And they want to see these homes built on empty brownfield sites, alongside good quality infrastructure and local services. They do not want homes needlessly built on Greenbelt land, imposed on them by an out-of-touch Whitehall and developers looking to make a quick buck. With reform in development and planning rules high up the government's agenda, I call on the government to do the right thing, listen to my constituents and take action as soon as possible. Thank you, Sir Ray.